Yeah. Hello, guys. So today we'll be speaking about this distributed leadership and the technology that supports it. And I believe this subject is very important for us for two reasons. Reason number one, people are talking about it. And reason number two, we don't have software for that. And this is a strong claim, I believe. And that's why I need to bring solid evidence behind this claim. And I can bring you that. Because reason number one, so everybody is talking about it. Deloitte University Press, in 2017, they published a report on human capital trends. And they said that, in this report, that 78% of managers said that leadership is important or very important for their organizations, with only 15% saying that traditional hierarchical leadership model is working good in their organizations. And this report is 11,000 managers with 130 countries. So that's a huge evidence. And reason number two, if you Google that, so try to Google software for team leadership, you find almost nothing. So how does that happen that such important problem got no software tools? But we are engineers. We don't ask that questions. We just build that tools if we don't have it. And in next 30 minutes, I will explain you how to build tool for leadership, for distributed leadership and team management with your own hands, even if you are not coding like me. I never wrote a line of code, but I can build that software, open source. So let us begin. Let's consider traditional organization, hierarchical organization. So some corporation that has departments. Departments consist of sections, and you got specialists in that. We have a job title. So if you go to R&D section and find the guy whose badge says that he is software developer, you got pretty good understanding what can you talk about with this guy. So job title is a very good model of the behavior of this person. But if you go to department manager, then it becomes a pretty complicated because department manager can be interested in R&D and testing. So a little less quality model. And if you go to CEO job title gives you no idea what concerns of this person are. And that's a problem. Poor model. You cannot predict what CEO can be interested in. But in fact, department managers are on committees. So you cannot say exactly, so it's a budgeting committee and a strategy committee. So if you see a department manager job title, he actually can be can have 4 stakeholder roles. And then you have working groups, and then you have project teams, and finally, this is a matrix organization where one person can be a part of several business actors. And job titles are not working in such kind of organizations. And we have a lot of them. A short history behind. This is not the first time that it's not fresh problem, because military has that problem for years. On a battlefield, you cannot wait for 2 weeks headquarters to decide what course of action can be. Because in 2 minutes you will be dead. You need to decide now. You need to decide now. And actually, leaders can be killed on battlefield. So everyone should be prepared to lead. Then Japanese companies came up with the BA concept of distributed leadership. Then Air Traffic Management Organization came up with the safety first concept, where everyone is responsible for leadership, so should take control. And then in last 7 years, big corporations got economical effect of distributed leadership. And I will explain how did they do that. So I made a reverse engineering. If I'm talking about distributed leadership, I need to bring you a definition of this term. It's a lot of system lingo, but the first thing you should understand is that if I'm talking distributed leadership, that means we have several leaders. Almost everyone should be engaged in this leadership. And the second one, if we are talking about leadership, then we should say that we have a common goal. And in systems thinking, the common goal is system of interest and a life cycle. So that's a long, complicated, but very exact definition of what do I mean by leadership. As a project manager, I hear a lot of complaints that we don't have resources, we don't have money, we don't have people, we don't have time, and we don't have anything. It's wonder how we got the things done. But the problem is we have resource in our projects we are under-managing, and that's team attention. What do I mean by that? Let's take an example as an operating room. We have a patient, we have a surgeon, and we have a nurse who is following blood pressure. For example, blood pressure is going down, so the patient is going to crash, and what does nurse say? Does she say, oh, I cannot distract surgeon because he is so focused now, he has focus on flow, I cannot disturb him, so let the patient crash? No. We cannot imagine that, but we have a lot of that in software development projects. Because I've seen a lot of situations where a project went south because people knew about risks, knew about problem, but they said nothing. Said nothing to manager because manager was occupied. He didn't listen to us. And that's funny because it feels so wrong in operating room, but we have a lot of that in our life. What do I offer? We cannot just take practices from operating room and bring them to software project. Why? Because here we have 10 people tops. In software development, we can have 40, 400, 4,000, 40,000 engineers working on the same system. So we cannot just import it. And we need different tools. What tools are these? First of all, we need to move from this concept of focus and flow as an individual focus and flow to teams focus and flow. And what do I mean by that? When we are thinking, we think in chunks, so that's a for object. And when we operate the chunk, we can make a conclusion of that. And that's then we take another chunk and make a conclusion on this chunk, and then we connect the results of reasoning, and that's our logic. That's how we think. And you should be very good at what you are doing, because working memory works in that way that you have 20 to 40 seconds to make the conclusion. And then you lose your attention, you lose your chunk, and your logic breaks. That's why tools, if you want to introduce them, should support that. What do they do? First of all, we should have the same concepts. So the team should operate at the same conceptual space. And then you can use team resource management techniques, and I can explain them later. And the good thing, so a lot of previous speeches were about this OMG essence. And alpha cards, alpha checklist is a very good example of these system thinking patterns. And you have these system thinking patterns for your team that you operate with the same concepts, and you got your flow in a team. And two main things about system thinking in systems engineering is a separation of concerns and system breakdowns. And that supports chunking. And you have common separation of concerns and system breakdowns in your team. And that also supports collective thinking. And as you got a distributed teams, you need a repository. When I introduced this model, many HR guys said it's very mechanical and people don't work that way. I say, no, it's not mechanical. We system engineers are all about people. Just we call them stakeholders. And what does that stand for? So it's an old word, but a new term. It's like 20 to 30 years old. Why is it important? As I said before, job title says you nothing in modern projects, in modern organizations. But if you know, you can learn, you can hear by heart what stakeholder person is now. Then you can build a scheme like this and can predict how do you affect your team. That's actually one of my artifacts, and it's less than 200 stakeholders. You actually can calculate how do you build your distributed leadership in the program or in large project. And we should now go to modeling technique. So if I'm talking about tools, then I should talk about the modeling. So we see that programmer writes a code. It's a classical Aristotle subject, action, object model. And we need to bring that statement into Archimate notation. And I say that when subject, that's a stakeholder. Because in systems approach, subject is a stakeholder. Who does the job? Stakeholder does. Action is practice. So exactly previous speech was about practices. Action is a practice. And subject, object is a business object of these practices. But the more funny thing is, why does he do that? Why does he write a code? And this question is not simple to answer. Because what you see here is a practice of shipbuilding. It's a really part of a life cycle of a ship. Why do they do that? Because they have a concept in their head that somehow sparkling wine bottle brings success to a ship. And that's the first principle of leadership. If you want people to do something, even such a stupid thing, rationally speaking, you need to bring concepts in their head. How do you do that? First, you should explicit these objects and then talk about them a lot. That's how it works. So everybody who has children know. So we have a stakeholder. Stakeholder is assigned to practice. Practice realizes discipline, and practice also accesses information and physical objects. And that's objects of your attention. That's a meta model of a leadership. That's a meta model. How do you build up? How do you engineer your team? Of course, you say that it's not the first meta model you see. We all see a Gantt chart, a Kanban, a bug tracker, a Jira, a task tracker, a lot of things. It's all the same. What's the difference? The difference is meta model. On the Kanban, you can put any sticker you want. There are no restrictions. In Archimate and SysArchi, you have restrictions. You have modeling agreement. And it's much more explicit than Kanban or Gantt chart. And actually, you can poke a hole in any Gantt chart I see or in a Kanban desk I see, but it works better. And we have another class of solution. This is fractal data organization system. That's an example. But I'll be talking about SysArchi. Don't try to read that. So fonts are small by intention. All you need to understand is that meta model of SysArchi is a very small one. You can actually start modeling that in one day. Or if you're talking about team, in like a couple of weeks, you can build on that. And that's objects of your attention, or objects of attention of your team. And if I compare fractal solutions versus this SysArchi, I can compare license with license. SysArchi is free. Model complexity, it covers like 10,000 objects and relations. It's pretty enough for most of projects. Modeling velocity, drops as model is growing, but we can live with that. And a source code is open. And the most important thing is, in SysArchi, you don't need external stakeholders, business stakeholders, to learn this SysArchi, because this is structural XML. You can parse it into structural document, text document. So you just generate the view they want and give it to them. Oh, it's bullshit, take that out. And then you need that, your model needs to be corrected. But it's not a snake oil, and that's why I need to explain how that really works with people. If I'm talking about distributed leadership, I need to bring very simple but powerful predicting model of how do people behave. It should be like this onion, Shrek explains. And if I bring it as myself, so for example, there is me as a business sector. So we are building on top of old Teams modeling technique that we have for more than 100 years now. So I'm a business sector. I'm a department, like a department. Small department consists of one person. And I have a task of list. Now I take as an example first task. So I'm making presentations. So I do that a lot. Dozens of presentations per year. And that's why I'm performing a practice of presenting. And when I'm performing this practice of presenting, I'm a stakeholder. I'm a speaker. And I can be a business analyst, I can be a housekeeper, I can be project manager, enterprise architect. And as a speaker, when I'm making a presentation, I'm not thinking about requirements, verification, or bulb sockets types. I'm focused on presenting, on a fonts, on an audience, on a narrative. So I have my attention focused on a practice, on a discipline, and on business objects of this practice. Yeah, to put it very simply, so me as business actor assigned to me as speaker, and this speaker stakeholder is assigned to the task, to the preparing our presentation. But I have a lot of other roles. And what are these roles? It's a project manager, for example. And who inside me decides that me as speaker, a stakeholder speaker, should be switched to me as a business analyst or project manager? Some other guy. We call that player. So if we have different roles, then there is a player who switches these roles, who switches different stakeholder. And as fact, when we build in teams and organization, we don't think only about performing tasks. We are talking about meeting commitments, fulfilling commitments. And that's not a stakeholder who fulfills commitment. That's a player. So we have three-part model: business sector, stakeholder, and player. So when we talk about that people are behaving poorly, then we should point exactly who is performing poorly: business sector, speaker, or player. I give you a metaphor. I know some girl that complained that new car had broken. She just ran out of gas. And she asked her husband to replace that car because it doesn't ride anymore. So that's a very simple approach. We say, fire this guy because he can't work in team. But we can assign, he's a player performing poorly, and we need to train he can be mastered as a player, or he has poor stakeholder skills. And that's more easy way to fix than firing. And that's, of course, very similar to Maxim Dorofeyev Jedi technique. Very similar one. But I put that in Archimate, and that's cooler. Actually, in system thinking, we call this a separation of concerns. So we can talk not only about people and teams. We should speak exactly on teams, or business actors, or players, or stakeholders, because when we see problems in for example, life cycle of a project, then we should take a deep dive in a team. If in capability, we need to go for business sector. If practice is performing poorly, we need to go for stakeholder. And that is actually the main thing about the main problem with the distributed leadership, because it doesn't write good because it's interdisciplinary. You need a lot of specialists and a lot of technical solutions to really build distributed leadership. But this is a template you can write upon. So, if you want to build a team, that definition of team, it's a classical definition, you can find it anywhere, almost anywhere. And the problem with this definition, do you know the problem with this definition? It implies we have a person that says that skills of these people are enough. It's never the case. Guys, we never know exactly what life cycle will be for this system. Nobody knows. So we need to go from authoritarian to teamwork, to stakeholders concept. And if we take that approach, we can define team both functionally, that's in yellow, all stakeholders required to perform life cycle of system of interest, and structurally, as a module, as all business actors with the needed authority to apply resources. And we can model that in Archimate. And when we model this in Archimate, we can put that concepts in other people's heads. So if you have a chief architect that knows exactly how this team is going to be built, he can explicit this knowledge to model, and you can fire all your mind readers from the team. and they're expensive. And this SysArchi model, it resolves your coordination problem, because it brings out all the project ontology as a result of modeling, of team modeling. It brings out all the project ontology to daylight, and you can discuss the logic of the team. You can find faults and improvements. And in fact, there are solutions existing, ABI, RCO, that can help you with that on an industrial level. So actually, the main idea, you need complicated exocortex, more or less formal, but more or less flexible, that allows you to coordinate complicated teams. And that's not Kanban, that's a SysArchi model. Don't throw away Kanban, you still need it. But all project managers can laugh now, because they know even if you have a perfect modeling, perfect plans, people will always fail it. As one manager said, why do I need a single competence and I need to hire a whole person with all his problems? I don't want that. I want only single competence. How do you resolve that? The only thing is working on a technology level, reproducible, like 80% of the cases, one-to-one meetings. And that technology is perfectly explained by Bruce Tulgan. Read his books, they're brilliant. I don't know why he's not famous in Russia. But the problem is, if this is only manager who does all these one-to-one meetings, then he will be working late hours doing that. And that's where distributed leadership comes into play. Because with the model, he can explain what exactly did he had in mind when he said certain task. So with this model, SMART becomes very specific, extremely specific. And that's really smart goal setting. How does that work? So you have this ontology explicit from a SysArchi model, from the project model, and you can divide it into areas and put a separate leader, like a nurse that is following blood pressure, responsible for this. You don't use your classical delegation of task concept. You delegate part of ontologies, areas. That's what you do. If I'm talking about the technology, so these are links to this technology, and you can download that. Okay, take your time, please. As a project manager, I have a buffer. So, yeah, okay. We're not in a hurry. You're just taking time from your questions. So, when we're saying about leadership, about modern distributed leadership, there is no person, even with 20 years of experience in software development, that knows perfectly well all practices of a complicated software system. You still need experts, and only experts can be leaders, qualified leaders in certain situations. You should accept that. But you need to train them. You just cannot appoint the guy to be a leader without giving him technology, training, authority, and rules. And this is a software engineering conference, okay? We're talking about model-based software engineering, okay? Use that. It's free. And that's my context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So please, questions, comments to our presenter? Okay, yeah, just a minute. Try this.
Hi.
Yeah, hello.
Thanks. It touched me very deeply, I can say, because two things. First thing, in first slides, I thought, this thing about team attention, leading, controlling team attention is very, very close to human consciousness. Because
It is?
yes, really, because my yoga teacher says you can't control anything in this world but your attention. So,
So
the
I'm
same
yoga
thing.
teacher, okay?
Yes, almost, for teams. And second thing, why I said it's touched me. Because I feel it's very natural for me, this distributed leadership. And I'm analyst, and I work with teams of analysts. And I think for analysts it's very natural, because you generate and share knowledge. How can you work elsewhere? Nothing. But it's very natural only for me sometimes, because two things for people around. Leadership means all had authority also, and also all had responsibility. Some people don't want to share their authority and to take responsibility. How do you work with it in your teams? Thanks.
So, thanks. That's a wonderful question. First of all, let me. I can bring my own example, but let's take Boeing example. Project Boeing 777. When they planned the program, they realized that they cannot complete this program in time. Yeah, so to fit the market window for this plane to be produced, and they said, okay. Where do we have the most delays? And they had delays in decision making, because a lot of decisions came to chief architect, and he decided how to distribute this weight. And they put out a very simple rule. So you can trade off any kilo of mass of these devices, so for every project team, so every engineering team, in exchange for $300 increase in price, in the cost. So that's how you do the decision. And you don't need managers' approval for that. So managers reviewed every decision that were made, but so they still had control, but there were no delays, because they actually, engineers did decisions by themselves. And that's what the key thing is about this distributed leadership. You need explicit rules. And you need that people to understand that rules of decision making and the consequences. So they had a logic. I said about project ontology, and that's a logic of thinking in the project. The problem is that nobody makes that logic visible, nobody teaches it. And that's why we have a lot of problems, because if I'm not taught how to make a decision, so what consequences are, of course I don't take responsibility. Why? Why do I? But that was a good one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, maybe we have a time for one very quick question. So would you please pass this? Okay, it worked. Fantastic. Well, no, not quite.
So engineers, they throw over the wall.
Well, that's
I really
life.
thought.
Yeah. Okay, please.
Okay, my question is very simple. It's good in theory, but sometimes we met a situation when we have to manage several teams, distributed teams in different locations, and not all team is part of our company.
Sure, that's why you need that.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm using that when 11 of 14 teams are not my responsibility at all.
Yeah. And sometimes it's happened after an assessment when we join an company and try to improve the process and improve the ways how to be more productive and so on. In that case, sometimes happens another company can work against us and don't accept our rules, our recommendations, and try doing as they want and they are doing previously and so on. What kind of practice we can use to prevent this in future?
Yeah, I can answer referring to one of the first slides. Thank you for the question. Why did?
I think it works.
Yeah. Why did that girl broke a sparkling wine bottle on the board of the ship? That was really stupid, rational speaking, because somebody put right concept in her head. And that's how you work with outsiders of your company. you put right concepts. And I know that is working because I worked on a General Motors localization project. So when you came up with this, so you need to transfer manufacturing from Poland to Tolyatti. And you really need to explain the guys in Tolyatti, in Samara, that these Japanese Pokayoke really can work in Russia. They don't believe that. Never. But when you make explicit logic of your project and explain that, so why do you need to apply this practice? How does that work? And bring a lot of evidence, it's very hard for them to resist.
So what's the evidence for, for sparkling wine crashing?
Yeah, maybe.
Because you use that example and now you're saying the opposite. There should be some logic, some reasoning.
Yeah.
There is no logic in, crashing the wine bottle.
Yeah, there is logic.
Okay.
If they wouldn't do that because if there were no logic. I say that you, in systems approach, you don't judge people.
Okay.
You're in pragmatic. You don't oppose
Okay, so
them.
there is a logic in, crashing the bottle. Okay, fine. Well, I think, that's all. So thank you very much. Yes, we're going to, I think, wrap it up here. Thank you.